Chapter 42. Samson Thurman and Rakeem Powell had already left the building by the time I got out of the Hefe's office. I felt as if I could easily go postal and nearly walked back inside Pittman's office and wiped up the floor with him. I went to my desk and thought about what to do next, tried to calm myself down before I did anything rash and stupid. I thought about my responsibilities to the people in Southeast, and that helped me. Still, I almost went back after Pittman. I called Christine and let out some steam. Then, on the spur of the moment, I asked if she could get away for an hour-long weekend, possibly starting on Thursday night. Christine said that she could go. I went and filled out a vacation form and left it on Fred Cook's desk. It was the last thing he and Pittman would expect from me. But I'd already decided the best thing would be to get away from here, cool down, and then figure out a plan to move forward. As I headed out of the building, another detective stopped me. "They're over at Hart's Bar," he said. "Samson said to tell you they reserved a seat for you." Hart's is a very seedy, very popular gin mill on 2nd Street. It isn't a cop's bar, which is why some of us like it. It was 11 in the morning and the barroom was already crowded, lively, even friendly. "Here he is," Jerome Thurman saluted me with a half-full beer mug as I walked inside. Half a dozen other detectives and friends were there too. The word had gotten around fast about the suspensions. There was a whole lot of laughter and shouting going on. "It's a bachelor's party," Samson said, and grinned. "Got you, sugar, with a little help from Nana. You should see the look on your face." For the next hour and a half, friends kept arriving at Hart's. By noon, the bar was full, and then the regular customers started coming in for their lunch hour nips. The owner, Mike Hart, was in his glory. I hadn't really thought about having a bachelor's party, but now that I was in the middle of one, I was glad it happened. A lot of men still guard their emotions and feelings, but not so much at a bachelor's party. At least not at a good one thrown by the people closest to you. This was a good one. The suspensions that had been handed down earlier that morning were mostly forgotten for a few hours. I was congratulated and hugged more times than I could count, and even kissed once or twice. Everybody was calling me sugar, following Samson's lead. The love word was used and overused. I was roasted and toasted in sentimental speeches that seemed hilarious at the time. Just about everybody had too much to drink. By 4 in the afternoon, Samson and I were studying each other, making our way into the blinding daylight on 2nd Street. Mike Hart himself had called us a cab. For a brief, clear moment, I was reminded of the purple and blue gypsy cab we were looking for, but then the thought evaporated into the nearly white sunlight. "Sugar," Samson whispered against my skull as we were climbing into our cab. "I love you more than life itself. It's true. I love your kids, love your Nana, love your wife-to-be, the lovely Christine. Take us home," he said to the driver. "Alex is getting married." "And he's the best man," I said to the driver, who smiled. "Yes, I am," said Samson. "The very best." Chapter 43. On Thursday night, Schaefer played the Four Horsemen again. He was locked inside his study, but through the early part of the night he could hear the sounds of his family throughout the house. He felt intensely isolated. He was nervous, jittery, and angry for no apparent reason. While he waited to log on with the other players, he found himself thinking back to his wild car ride through Washington. He relived a particular feeling over and over. The imagined moment of sudden impact with an unmovable structure. He saw it as blinding light and physical objects and himself, all shattering like glass and then becoming part of the universe again. Even the pain he would feel would be part of the reassembling of matter into other fascinating forms and shapes. I am suicidal, he finally thought. Just a matter of time. I really am death. When it was exactly 9 o'clock, he began to type in a message on his computer. The other horsemen were online, waiting for his response to the visit and warning by George Bayer. He didn't want to disappoint them. What they had done had made him even more enthusiastic about playing the game. He wrote, "Strangely, Death wasn't surprised when famine appeared in Washington. Of course, he had every right to come, just as Death could go to London or Singapore or Manila or Kingston, and perhaps Death will pay one of you a visit soon. That's the beauty of the game we play. Anything can happen. Ultimately, the issue is trust, isn't it? Do I trust that you will allow me to continue to play the fantasy game as I wish? After all, that's what makes the game distinctive and alluring, the freedom we experience. That is the game now, isn't it? We have evolved into something new. We have raised the table stakes, so let's have some real excitement, fellow horsemen. I have a few ideas to try out on you. Everything is in the spirit of the game. No unnecessary risks will be taken. Let's play the game as if our lives depended on it. Perhaps mine already does. As I told you, we have 2 new players. They are Washington detectives named Alex Cross and John Sampson. Worthy opponents. I'm watching them, but I can't help wondering whether soon they'll be watching me. Let me tell you about a fantasy scenario that I've created to welcome them to our game. I'm sending pictures now. Detectives Cross and Sampson. Chapter 44. It took us a day to get organized for our trip, but everybody seemed to enjoy the spontaneity and also the special treat of our all being together on a vacation for the first time. And so Damon, Janny, Nana, Christine, and I left D.C. in the afternoon and arrived in high spirits at Bermuda International Airport late on Thursday evening, the 25th of August. I definitely wanted to be out of Washington for a few days. The Mr. Smith murder case had been followed too quickly by the Jane Doe investigation. I needed a rest. I had a friend who was part owner of a hotel in Bermuda, and it wasn't a particularly long airplane ride. It was perfect for us. One scene from the airport will always stick in my mind. Christine singing Jada, with Janny stuck at her side. I couldn't help thinking that they looked like mother and daughter, and that touched me deeply. They were so affectionate and playful, so natural. It was a mind photo for me to have and to hold. One of those moments that I knew I'd never forget, even as I watched the 2 of them dancing and singing as if they'd known each other forever. We were blessed with extraordinarily good weather for our holiday. It was sunny and blue-skied every day, morning until nightfall, when the sky turned a magical combination of reds, oranges, and purples. The day belonged to all of us, but especially to the kids. We went swimming and snorkeling at Elbow Beach and Horseshoe Bay, and then raced mopeds along the picturesque middle and harbor roads. The nights belonged to Christine and me, and we made the best of them. We hit all the best spots: the terrace bar at the Palm Reef, the gazebo lounge at the Princess, the Clay House Inn, Once Upon a Table in Hamilton, Horizons in Paget. I loved being with her, and that thought kept drifting through my mind. I felt that what we shared had been strengthened because I had backed off and given her time and space. And I felt whole again. I kept remembering the very first time I had seen her in the schoolyard at Sojourner Truth. She's the one, Alex. That thought still played in my head, too. We sat at the terrace bar overlooking the city and harbor of Hamilton. The water was dotted with small islands, white sails, ferries going back and forth to Warwick and Paget. I don't know how it's pronounced. We held hands, and I couldn't stop staring into her eyes. Didn't want to. Big thoughts? She finally asked. I've been thinking a lot about going into private practice again, I told her. I think it might be the best thing to do. She stared into my eyes. I don't want you to do it for me, Alex. Please don't make me the cause of your leaving your job with the police. I know you love it. Most days you do. The job has been tearing at me lately. Pittman isn't just a difficult boss. I think he's a bad guy. What happened to Sampson and the others is just bullshit. They were working unsolved cases on their own time. I'm tempted to give the story to Zach Taylor at the Post. People would riot if they knew the truth, which is why I won't give it to the Post. She listened and tried to help, but she didn't push, and I appreciated that. It does sound like a terrible, complicated, nasty mess, Alex. I'd like to punch out Pittman, too. He's choosing politics over protecting people. I'm sure you'll know what to do when the time is right. The next morning, I found her walking in the garden with tropical flowers strewn in her hair. She looked radiant, even more than usual, and I fell in love all over again. There's an old saying I've been hearing since I was a little girl, she told me as I joined her. If you have only 2 pennies, buy a loaf of bread with one and a lily with the other. I kissed her hair in between the flowers. I kissed her sweet lips, her cheeks, the hollow in her throat. The kids and I went back to Horseshoe Bay Beach early that afternoon. They couldn't get enough of the deep blue sea, swimming, snorkeling, and building sandcastles. And, of course, it was almost time to start school again. So everything about our vacation was extra special and intense. Christine took a moped trip into Hamilton to pick up mementos for a few of the teachers at Sojourner Truth. We all waved until she was out of sight on Middle Road. Then back into the water. Around 5 o'clock, Damon, Johnny, and I returned to the Belmont Hotel, which sat like a sentinel on lush green hills framed by china blue skies. All around, everywhere we looked, were pastel-colored cottages with white roofs. Nana was sitting out on the porch talking to a couple of her new best friends. Paradise regained, I thought, and felt something deep and sacred coming back to life inside me. As I stared out at the cloudless blue sky, I regretted that Christine wasn't there to share it. I actually missed her in just that shorter time. I hugged Johnny and Damon, and we were all smiling at the obvious. We loved being here together, and we were so damn fortunate to have one another. "You miss her," Johnny whispered. It was a statement, not a question. "That's good, Daddy. That's the way it should be, right?" When Christine still hadn't returned by 6 o'clock, I struggled between conflicting thoughts of waiting for her at the hotel or driving into Hamilton myself. Maybe she'd had an accident. Those damn mopeds, I thought, having found them fun and perfectly safe just the afternoon before. I spotted a tall, slender woman entering through the front gates of the Belmont, walking against a background of hibiscus and oleander. I sighed with relief, but as I started down the front stairs, I saw that it wasn't Christine. Christine still hadn't returned or called the hotel by 6:30 or by 7 o'clock. I finally called the police. Chapter 45. Inspector Patrick Busby from the Hamilton PD arrived at the Belmont Hotel around 7:30. He was a small, balding man who, from a distance, looked to be in his late 50s or 60s. As he approached the front porch, though, I could tell he was no more than 40, around the same age as me. He listened to my story, then said that visitors often lost track of time and of themselves in Bermuda. There were also occasional moped accidents on Middle Road. He promised me that Christine would show up soon with a mild road rash or a slightly turned ankle. I wouldn't have any of it. She was always punctual, and at the very least she would have called. I knew that somehow she'd call me if she had a minor accident. So the inspector and I rode together between the hotel and Hamilton, and then we toured the streets of the capital city, particularly Front and Reed streets. I was silent and solemn-faced as I stared out of the car, hoping to get a glimpse of Christine shopping on some side street, forgetful of the hour. But we didn't see her anywhere, and she still hadn't called the hotel. When she still hadn't turned up by 9, Inspector Busby reluctantly agreed that Christine might be missing. He asked a lot of questions that showed me he was a decent cop. He wanted to know if we'd had any kind of argument or disagreement. "I'm a homicide detective in Washington, D.C., I finally told him. I've been holding it back because I didn't want this to get territorial. I've been involved with high-profile cases involving mass murders in the past. I've known some very bad men. There might be a connection. I hope not, but that could be." "I see," Busby said. He was such a precise, neat man with his thin pencil mustache. He looked more like a fussy school teacher than a cop, more like a psychologist than I did. "Are there any other surprises I should know about, Detective Cross?" he asked. "No, that's it, but you see why I'm worried and why I called you. I'm working on a series of nasty murders in Washington right now." "Yes, I see a reason for your concern now. I will put out a missing persons report forthwith." I sighed heavily, then went upstairs and talked to the kids and Nana. I tried my best not to alarm them, but Damon and Johnny started to cry, and then Nana did too. We had learned nothing more about Christine or her whereabouts by midnight. Inspector Busby left the hotel at 12:15. He was kind, actually, and considerate enough to give me his home number. He asked me to call right away if I heard from Christine. Then he said my family and I would be in his prayers. At 3, I was still up and pacing my hotel room on the 3rd floor and doing some praying myself. I had just gotten off the phone with Quantico. The FBI was cross-checking all of my homicide cases to see if anyone I'd investigated had any connection with Bermuda. The Bureau was now concentrating on the current series of unsolved murders in Southeast. Had faxed them my profile on the Weasel. I didn't have any logical reason to suspect that the killer might be here in Bermuda, and yet I feared he might be. It was just the kind of feeling that the Jefe had been rejecting about the murders in Southeast. I understood that the Bureau probably wouldn't get back to me until later in the morning. I was tempted to call friends at Interpol, but I held off. And then I called Interpol too. The hotel room was filled with mahogany Queen Anne furniture and wicker and had dusty pink carpets. It seemed empty and lonely. I stood like a ghost before the tall, water-stained dormer windows, stared out at the shifting black shapes against the moonlit sky, and remembered how I held Christine in my arms. I felt incredibly helpless and alone without her. I also couldn't believe this had happened. I hugged myself tightly and became aware of a terrible pain all around my heart. The tightening pain was like a solid column that went from my chest all the way up into my head. I could see her face, her beautiful smile. I remember dancing with her one night at the Rainbow Room in New York, and dinner at Kincaid's in Washington, and that one special night at her place when we laughed and thought maybe we'd made a baby. Was Christine out there somewhere on the island? She had to be. I prayed again that she was safe. She had to be safe. I refused to have any other thought for more than a couple of seconds. The telephone in the room rang, a short burst, at a little past 4 in the morning. My heart was stuck in my throat, my skin crawled, felt as if it were shrinking and no longer fit my body. I rushed across the room and grabbed the phone before the second ring. My hand was trembling. The strange, muffled voice scared me. "You have email." I couldn't think straight. I couldn't think at all. I'd brought my laptop with me on vacation. Who knows that I have my computer here? Who could know a small detail like that about me? Who's been watching me? Watching us? I yanked open the closet door, grabbed the computer, hooked it up, and logged on. I scrolled down the email to the last message. It was short and very concise. "She's safe for now. We have her." The curt, cold message was worse than anything I could imagine. Each word was branded into my brain, repeating over and over. "She's safe for now. We have her." Book 3, Elegy, Chapter 46. Sampson arrived at the Belmont Hotel the day after Christine disappeared. I hurried down to the small front lobby to meet him. He threw his large arms around me, clasping me tightly, but gently, as if he were holding a child in his arms. "You okay? You holding up?" he asked. "Not even close," I told him. I spent half a day checking the email address I got last night. It came from Curtin@mindspring.com. The address was falsified. Nothing is going right. "We'll get Christine back. We'll find her." He told me what he knew I wanted to hear, but I was sure that he also truly believed it in his heart. Sampson is the most positive human being I've ever met. He won't be denied. "Thanks for coming. It means a lot to all of us." "I can't think straight about anything. I'm really rattled, John. I can't even begin to imagine who could have done this. Maybe the weasel? I don't know." "If you could think straight now," John said, "I'd be more worried about you than usual. That's why I'm here." "I kinda knew you'd come." "Of course you did. I'm Sampson. Occam's razor and all that other deep philosophical shit at work here." There were a half-dozen guests in the hotel lobby, and all of them looked our way. The hotel staff knew about Christine's disappearance, and I'm sure the guests at the Belmont knew as well, as did just about everybody else on this small, chatty island. The story's on the front page of the local newspaper, Sampson said. People were reading copies at the airport. I told him, Bermuda is small, mostly peaceful and orderly. The disappearance of a tourist or any kind of violent crime is unusual here. I don't know how the paper got the story so quickly. The leak must have come out of the police station. Local police won't help us. Probably get in the way, Sampson muttered as we walked over to the hotel registration desk. He signed in, then we trudged upstairs to show Nana and the kids that Uncle John was here. Chapter 47. The following morning, the two of us met for hours with the police in Hamilton. They were professionals, but a kidnapping was a rarity for them. They let us set up in their station house on Front Street. I still couldn't concentrate or focus the way I needed to. Bermuda is a 21 square mile island. While the British colony is small, we soon discovered that there are more than 1,200 roads on the island. Sampson and I split up and covered as much ground as we possibly could. For the next 2 days, we went from 6 in the morning until 10 or 11 at night without a break. I didn't want to stop, not even to sleep. We didn't do any better than the locals, though. No one had seen a thing. We'd reached a dead end. Christine had disappeared without a trace. We were bone tired. After we finished at the station house on the third night, Sampson and I went for a late swim at Elbow Beach, just down the road from the hotel. We had learned to swim at the municipal pool in D.C. Nana had insisted that we learn. She was 54 at the time and stubborn. She made up her mind to learn and took lessons with us from the Red Cross. The majority of people in Southeast didn't know how to swim back then, and she felt it was symbolic of the limiting inner city experience. So one summer, Sampson and I tackled swimming with Nana at the municipal pool. We went for lessons 3 mornings a week and usually practiced for an extra hour after that. Nana herself was soon able to swim 50 or more laps. She had stamina, same as now. I rarely get into the water without flashing back to those fine summer days of my youth when I became a reasonably good swimmer. Now Sampson and I floated on the calm surface, out about 100 yards or so from shore. The sky above was the deepest shade of evening blue, sparkling with countless stars. I could see the curving white line of the beach as it stretched several miles in either direction. Palm and casuarina trees shimmied in the sea breeze. I felt devastated, totally overwhelmed, as I floated on the sea. I kept seeing Christine with my eyes open or closed. I couldn't believe she was gone. I teared up as I thought about what had happened. The unfairness of life sometimes. You want to talk about the investigation? My thoughts so far? Little things I learned today? Or give it a rest for the night? Sampson asked me as we floated peacefully on our backs. Talk or quiet time? Talk, I guess. I can't think about anything else except Christine. I can't think straight. Say whatever you're thinking. Something bothering you in particular? Little thing, but maybe it's important. I didn't say anything, I just let him go on. What puzzles me is the first newspaper stories. Sampson paused and then continued. Busby says he didn't talk to anybody the first night, not a single person, he claims. You didn't either. Story was in the morning edition, though. It's a small island, John. I told you that, and you've seen it yourself. But Samson kept at it, and I began to think that maybe there was something to it. Listen, Alex, only you, Patrick Busby, and whoever took Christine knew. He called it into the paper. The kidnapper did it himself. I talked to the girl at the paper who got the call. She wouldn't say anything yesterday, but she finally told me late today. She thought it was just a concerned citizen calling. I think somebody's playing with your head, Alex. Somebody's running a nasty game on you. We have her. A game? What kind of nasty game? Who are the nasty players? Was one of them the Weasel? Was it possible that he was still here in Bermuda? Chapter 48. I couldn't sleep back at the hotel. I still couldn't concentrate or focus, and it was incredibly frustrating. It was as if I were losing my mind. A game? No, this wasn't a game. This was shock and horror. This was a living nightmare beyond anything I had ever experienced. Who could have done this to Christine? Why? Who was the Weasel? Every time I closed my eyes, tried to sleep, I could see Christine's face, see her waving goodbye that final time on Middle Road, see her walking through the hotel gardens with flowers in her hair. I could hear Christine's voice all through the night, and then it was morning again. My guilt over what had happened to her had doubled, tripled. Samson and I continued to canvass Middle Road, Harbor Road, South Road. Every person we spoke to in the police and the military believed that Christine didn't simply disappear on the island. Samson and I heard the same song and dance every day for a week. No shopkeepers or taxi or bus drivers had seen her in Hamilton or St. George, so it was possible that she'd never even arrived in either town that afternoon. No one, not one witness, remembered seeing her moped on Middle or Harbor roads, so maybe she never even got that far. Most disturbed me of all was that there hadn't been any further communication with me about her since the email on the night she disappeared. An agent at the FBI had investigated the email address and confirmed that it didn't exist. Whoever had contacted me was a skillful hacker, able to conceal his or her identity. The words I had read that night were always on my mind. She's safe for now. We have her. Who was we? And why hadn't there been any further contact? What did they want from me? Did they know they were driving me insane? Was that what they wanted to do? Did the Weasel represent more than one killer? Suddenly that made a lot of sense to me. Samson returned to Washington on Sunday, and he took Nana and the kids with him. They didn't want to leave without me, but it was time for them to go. I couldn't make myself leave Bermuda yet. It would have felt as if I were abandoning Christine. On Sunday night, Patrick Busby showed up at the Belmont Hotel around 9. He asked me to ride with him out past Southampton, about a 6-mile drive that he said would take us 20 minutes or more. Bermudians measure distance in straight lines, but all the roads run in wiggles and half circles, so it always takes longer to travel than you might think. What is it, Patrick? What's out in Southampton? I asked as we rode along Middle Road. My heart was in my throat. He was scaring me with his silence. We haven't found Mrs. Johnson. However, a man may have witnessed the abduction. I want you to hear his story. You decide for yourself. You're the big city detective, not me. You can ask whatever questions you like. Off the record, of course. The man's name was Perry Graham, and he was staying in a room at the Port Royal Golf Club. We met him at his tiny apartment in the staff quarters. He was tall and painfully thin, with a longish goatee. He clearly wasn't happy to see Inspector Busby or me on his doorstep. Busby had already told me that Graham was originally from London and now worked as a porter and maintenance man at the semi-private golf club. He had also lived in New York City and Miami and had a criminal record for selling crack in New York. I already told him everything I saw, Perry Graham said defensively, as soon as he opened the front door of his room and saw the two of us standing there. Go away, let me be. Why would I hold back anything? Or I cut him off. My name is Alex Cross. I'm a homicide detective from Washington. The woman you saw was my fiancée, Mr. Graham. May we come in and talk? This will only take a few minutes. He shook his head back and forth in frustration. I'll tell you what I know. Again, he finally said, relenting. Yeah, come in, but only because you called me Mr. Graham. That's all I want. I'm not here to bother you about anything else. Busby and I walked inside the room, which was little more than an alcove. The tile floors and all of the furniture were strewn with wrinkled clothes, mostly underwear. A woman I know lives in Hamilton, Graham said in a weary voice. I went to visit her this Tuesday past. We drank too much wine, stayed the evening, you know how it is. I got up somehow, had to be at the club by noon, but I knew I'd be late and get docked some of my pay. Don't have a car or nothing, so I hitched a ride from Hamilton out South Shore Road. Walked along near Paget, I suppose. Damn hot afternoon, I remember. I went down to the water, cool off if I could. I came back up over a knobbly hill, and I witnessed an accident on the roadway. It was maybe a quarter of a mile down the big hill there. You know it? I nodded and held my breath as I listened to him. I remember the stifling heat of that afternoon, everything about it. I could still see Christine driving off on a shiny blue moped, waving and smiling. The memory of her smile, which had always brought me such joy, now put a tight knot in my stomach. I saw a white van hit a woman riding a blue moped. I can't be sure, but it almost looked like the van hit her on purpose. Driver, he jumped out of the van right away and helped her up. She didn't look like she was hurt badly. Then he helped her inside the van, put the moped inside too. Then he drove off. I thought he was taking her to the hospital, thought nothing else of it. You sure she wasn't badly hurt? I asked. Not sure, but she got right up. She was able to stand all right. There was a catch in my voice when I spoke again. And you didn't tell anybody about the accident, not even when you saw the news stories? The man shook his head. Didn't see no stories. Don't bother with the local news much. Just small-time shit and worthless gossip. But then my girl, she kept talking about it. I didn't want to go to the police, but she made me do it. Made me talk to this inspector here. You know what kind of van it was? I asked. White van. I think it was maybe a rented one, clean and new. License plate? Graham shook his head. Don't have no idea. What did the man in the van look like? I asked him. Any little thing you remember is helpful, Mr. Graham. You've already helped a lot. He shrugged, but I could tell that he was trying to think back to that afternoon. Nothing special about him. Not as tall as you, but tall. Looked like anybody else, just a black man like any other. Chapter 49. In a small apartment in a suburb of Washington called Mount Rainier, Detective Patsy Hampton lay in bed, restlessly flipping through the pages of the Post. She couldn't sleep, but there was nothing unusual about that. She often had trouble sleeping ever since she was a little girl in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Her mother said she must have a guilty conscience about something. She watched a rerun episode of ER, then fetched herself a Stonyfield yogurt with blueberries and logged on to America Online. She had an email from her father, now relocated in Delray Beach, Florida, and one from an old college roommate from the University of Richmond, whom she'd never been that close to anyway. The roommate had just heard from a mutual friend that Patsy was a hotshot police detective in Washington, and what an exciting life she must lead. The roommate wrote that she had 4 children and lived in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, but added that she was bored with everything in her life. Patsy Hampton would have given anything to have just one child. She wandered back to the kitchen and got a cold bottle of Evian mineral water. She was aware that her life had become ridiculous. She spent too much time on her job, but also too much time by herself in her apartment, especially on weekends. It wasn't that she couldn't get dates, she was just turned off by men in general lately. She still fantasized about finding someone compatible, having children, but she was increasingly tired of the depressing and maddening cycle of trying to meet someone interesting. She usually ended up with guys who were either hopelessly boring or 30-something jackasses who still acted like teenagers, though without the charm of youth. Hopeless, 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 she thought, as she sent off a cheery lie to her dad in Florida. The phone rang and she glanced at her wristwatch. It was 20 past 12. She snatched up the receiver. Hampton speaking. It's Chuck, Patsy. Really sorry to call so late. Is it okay? You awake? Sure, no problem, Chuck E. Cheese. I'm up with the other vampires. Yourself included, I guess. It was kinda late, but she was glad to hear from Chuck Huffstudler, who was a computer geek at the FBI in Washington. The two of them helped each other out sometimes, and she'd recently talked to him about the unsolved DC murders, especially the Jane Does. Chuck had told her that he was also in contact with Alex Cross, but Cross had trouble of his own right now. His fiancée had been kidnapped, and Patsy Hampton wondered if it had anything to do with the killings in Southeast. I'm wide awake, Chuck. What's up? What's on your big mind? He started with a disclaimer that said volumes about his incredibly low self-esteem. Maybe nothing, but maybe something a little interesting on those killings in Southeast, and particularly the 2 young girls in Shaw. This really comes out of left field, though. The FBI computer expert had her attention. That's where this killer lives, Chuck, in deep left field. Tell me what you have. I'm wide awake and listening. Talk to me, Chuck E. Cheese. Chuck hemmed and hawed. He was always like that, which was too bad because he was basically a really nice guy. You know anything about RPGs, Patsy? He asked. I know it stands for role-playing games, and let's see. There's a popular one called Dragons and Dungeons, or Dungeons and Dragons, whatever the order. It's Dungeons and Dragons, or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Confession time, kiddo. I occasionally play an RPG myself. It's called Millennium's End. I play a couple of hours a day, usually more on weekends. New to me. Go on, Chuck. Gosh, she thought. Cyberspace confessions in the middle of the night. Very popular game, even with so-called adults. The characters in Millennium's End work for Black Eagle Security. It's a private organization of troubleshooters who hire out for investigative services around the world. The characters are all good guys, crusaders for good. Chuck. Say 6 Hail Marys, now make an act of contrition, then get to the damn point. It is around 12:30 pound. Right, I am heartily sorry and deeply embarrassed too. Anyway, there's a chat room online that I visited. It's called the Gamesters Chat Room and it's on AOL. As I speak, there's a fascinating discussion going on about a new kind of game. It's more of an anti-game, though. All the role-playing games I know are about good characters trying to conquer chaos and evil. The game under discussion has a couple of evil characters trying to overcome good. Specifically, Patsy, one of the characters, is attacking and murdering women in the southeast part of DC. Lots of lurid detail on the murders. These aren't the actual players, but they know about the game. The game itself is probably protected. Thought you should know. The game is called The Four Horsemen. Patsy Hampton was definitely wide awake now. I'm on it. Thanks, Chuck. Let's keep this between the two of us for the moment, okay, Chuck? Yeah, okay. It took her a couple minutes to log on to AOL, then get into the Gamesters chat room. She didn't participate, just read what the others had to say. This was interesting. She wondered if she had just stumbled onto her first big break in the Jane Doe case. The others in the room were named Viper, Landlocked, J-Boy, and Lancelot. They chattered on and on about the hottest fantasy games and cutting-edge magazines, which nearly succeeded in putting her to sleep. The Four Horsemen came up twice, but only in passing, as a point of reference. Lancelot was the one who mentioned it. Chuck was right. These probably weren't the actual players, but they knew about the game somehow. The fantasy nerds were starting to really wear thin with her by 1:15. Finally, out of frustration, she typed out a message for the little shitheels. She called herself Sappho. I came in late, but Horsemen sounds like a neat kind of revolutionary game to me, Lancelot. Pretty audacious stuff, no? Lancelot shot back. Not really, Sappho. There's a lot of it going around lately. Anti-heroes, sickos, especially in vampire game circles. Hampton typed, haven't I read about murders like these in the newspapers? By the way, it's Sappho, like the poet. Lancelot replied, yeah, but lots of RPGs use current events. No biggie, really, Sappho. Hampton grinned. He was an obnoxious little nerd, but she had him, for the moment anyway. And she needed him. How much did he know about the Four Horsemen? Could he be a player? She tried to peek at Lancelot's profile, but he had restricted access to it. You're funny. Are you a player, Laugh-A-Lot, or just an art critic? I don't like the basic concept of Horsemen. Anyway, it's a private game, strictly private, encrypted. You know any of the players? I might like to try it out myself. There was no response to the question. Patsy thought maybe she pushed too hard too fast. Damn. Should have known better. Damn. Come back, Lancelot, Earth to Lancelot. I really would like to play the Four Horsemen, but I'm cool about it. No biggie. Lancelot. Patsy Hampton waited, and then Lancelot left the chat room. Lancelot was gone, and so was her connection to somebody playing a so-called fantasy game about committing gruesome murders in Washington. Murders that had really happened.